Hi, friends. I am Laura Stastny, and this is Bat Release 2021. Hopefully, we're going to make sure that we have everything technologically correct right now so that you guys can watch Bat Release with us. So just give us a few minutes here while we're waiting for people to come online and waiting for our staff to kind of get everything ready to go. So I see you guys are popping in there. It's so good to see you guys tonight. Forgive my technology snafus a little bit with this camera here. I'm going to keep doing my best. Thanks, Debbie. I see that you can see it. Awesome. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you guys tonight. Give us a few more minutes. We're going to let people pop in. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk a little bit about Nebraska Wildlife Rehab and a little bit about the bats tonight, just for a few minutes. And then as soon as that's done, we will go ahead and watch the release. During this time, when I'm done talking and the bats start getting released, if you guys have questions about the bats or bat release, just throw them in the chat box. And Lauren is going to help us by making sure that I see the questions, because sometimes I don't see them when I'm doing this. So Amy, you're right. It's an awesome day for bat release. The temperatures are perfect and there's absolutely zero wind out here tonight. So it's going to be a great night for the bats to go. Eric, I see your question and the answer is yes. And we're going to talk about it a little bit, but if we don't, put that up in the box again so that I can kind of clarify that here in a little bit. Hi, Chris. It's good to see you tonight. All right. I can see them staging up there. I'm trying to get into a place where the sun isn't directly in the camera, but we'll see how that goes. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you guys all for tuning in tonight for Nebraska Wildlife Rehab's 12th annual bat release. This is our second virtual bat release and hopefully our last virtual bat release, right? We totally miss being out at the Jocelyn Art Museum with all of you guys and having you here in person to see the bats get released. It's just not as fun without you. But I do have to say, it is still pretty fun to get out here as a staff and with volunteers and release these bats. Tonight, we're going to release about 400 big brown bats back into the wild. And you know what? It's the best day in a wildlife rehabilitator's life is the day that we get to release the animals back into the wild where they belong. So we're pretty excited tonight. And it's pretty exhilarating too. So I do want to say that in order for us to be able to get together next year, I hope that you all are doing everything you can to help us lick the COVID virus. Well, don't lick the COVID virus, but let's quash the COVID virus. So get vaccinated if you can, wear your masks, tolerate that social distancing a little bit longer, because hopefully we can get this taken care of and we can all go back to the way it was at the Jocelyn next year. That is our hope. So if you are someone who is joining us from out of state or out of the country even, and if you've never been to bat release before, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Nebraska Wildlife Rehab. So Nebraska Wildlife Rehab is an organization with a twofold mission. We're here to rescue and rehabilitate native wildlife and return it to the wild. And then we're also here to educate people about wildlife and wild spaces. So to that end, we rehabilitate between 6,000 and 7,000 animals every year right here in Nebraska. And we do lots of educational programs and collaborations, including middle school and elementary school programming through Collective for Youth. We have our own high school science academy. And if you're a high school student that's interested in doing the high school science academy this summer, we're still enrolling students now through April 17th, I believe, maybe April 19th. So go to our website and check that out under the education tab. We also have a university internship program, and we do all sorts of other in-person wildlife education. And then we try to do as much as we can online and through social media. We also have this telephone hotline that is there to answer your questions if you ever have a problem with a wild animal. So maybe you find a sick animal, an orphaned or injured animal. I'm trying to change the light here a little bit, you guys. And you need help with that. Or perhaps you have raccoons in your chimney and you're wondering how to get rid of them. We are here to help you. So if you need help with a wild animal for any reason, please do call our hotline or go to our website, nebraskawildliferehab.org. and you'll find a ton of advice there and a way to contact us. So if you ever have an issue, please call us first, because we're here to help you and to help wildlife. We want you to know, I do have to say, you guys, I'm totally looking at my notes because I'm getting old and I don't remember everything anymore. So I've got notes. 2021 is going to be a pretty amazing year for Nebraska Wildlife Rehab. And I hope that you guys will all follow us and share along with us, because we have a lot of announcements to make, some major announcements, and then also some announcements about collaborations. So we're really going to start making those announcements on social media about April 16th. So follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Sign up for our email address. Sorry, I was looking at a comment. Sign up for our email list so that you can get notifications, because there's a lot of really cool stuff happening and we want to share it with you guys. Also, if you did not know, Omaha Gives is no longer happening. That's a giving day that's happened in Omaha for the last several years in May. But now Omaha Gives is closed, and there's something that is coolly replacing it, and that is Share Omaha's Do Good Week. And Share Omaha's Do Good Week starts on April 19th, Monday, April 19th. And it's a week of raising awareness for nonprofits in Omaha. And there's a theme every day. So like Monday is Mission Monday and Wednesday is Wish List Wednesday. So tune in to our social media and to Share Omaha just to learn more about that and to support all of the nonprofits that you care about in the Omaha area. Page 3. Okay, so just stay tuned, because we cannot wait to share some of this super cool news with you. So on to bat release. Although Nebraska Wildlife rehabilitates all sorts of native wildlife, bats are one of the most common animals that we rehabilitate. And in fact, we're one of the largest bat rehabilitation facilities in the United States. Each year we get about 600 bats for care. I'm totally going to do something. I'm just going to interrupt here for a second. Somebody text Phyllis and give her the gate code, because I know that's why she's calling. Okay. Sorry, everybody. And so most of these bats that we get, they come to us during the winter. And the reason that we get them in the winter is because they're found in people's houses and in other, commercial buildings and things, mostly in downtown Omaha. These bats hibernate throughout the winter, and if they're woken up and are in somebody's house, people will call us, or they'll call the Nebraska Humane Society, and we get the bats for care. The reason that we can't just leave them alone is, number one, most people don't want us to leave the bat in their building. But number two, when bats wake up in the winter and they fly around, they burn critical energy and body fat that they need to hibernate through the winter. So if we didn't help them out, they might die before spring, when their primary food source, insects, is back out. So that's why we get so many bats every year. This winter, we got a kind of a smaller number of bats than we normally get in the winter. From October through now, we got just over 400 bats in for care. And tonight we're going to release just under 400 bats back into the wild with you guys all here tonight. Normally we don't invite people to watch releases with us, because wild animals are really stressed out by people in general. So if we were to invite a whole bunch of people out for, say, an opossum release, it could totally stress out the opossum and alter its behavior at release. So most of the time releases are really quiet and peaceful. But these bats, they're city bats. They're pretty tolerant of people being around. And so that's why we're able to share bat release with you every year in a setting like the Jocelyn. All of our bats tonight here are big brown bats, but each year Nebraska Wildlife Rehab gets 5 to 8 species of bat in for care. Don't let that name fool you. Big brown bats only weigh about 1/2 of an ounce to 2/3 of an ounce. So they're not a very large bat, but they can eat an enormous amount of insects. And so therefore they are very, very beneficial, as all bats are, to humans. This winter, we also overwintered a couple of other species, evening bat and a silver-haired bat, but they won't be released here tonight because they don't want to be out here with the crazy big browns. So I'm going to let you guys ask all your questions about bats. I know that Lauren is monitoring that, and I'm going to answer those for you. But I do have to say one more thing. Tonight, some of you are going to notice that Ellie, our rescue and rehab coordinator, is not here, and she is like a staple and well-known sight at bat release. And sadly, Ellie had a planned trip out of town this weekend and cannot be here. And unfortunately, bat release waits for no woman and no man. So when it's time for the bats to go and the weather is perfect, we just have to let these bats go back into the wild where they belong. Tonight we're also missing Heather Ingram and Amy Compania, both longtime bat rehabilitators. And they both one had a trip out of town and another one had a family commitment that they opted into. So unfortunately, they're not here either. So you're going to see a lot of our new staff, some of our other volunteers tonight, and you will see some familiar faces as well. We miss them, but we'll see them again next year, right? So that is that. I'm almost done, promise. Okay, so the way that this is set up tonight is that our staff right now is staging all the bats. So they're going to bring them down here and put them on this table like we used last year for virtual release. And then we have 4 people that are going to release bats. So it's going to be some staff members, Aaron and Frankie, Alex and Scott who is a volunteer. They're going to be releasing, and then we'll have other volunteers and staff members out in the field spotting. So if you've been at the Jocelyn before, you know that we place people around to make sure that the bats don't hit the ground. If the bats hit the ground, we give them another chance to fly and get out. Sometimes they just miscalculate a little bit in a new place and they need a little helping hand. So we will do that. We'll get the camera in up close, and you'll be able to see the bats up close as they get released. During this whole time, ask as many questions as you want. Lauren, our education coordinator, is going to help me answer them. And so we will do as much as we can to answer the questions that you have. But if you guys ask me any tough questions, I know I got stumped last year at least once. I hope there are my wildlife veterinary friends and my biologist friends out there watching, so that way I can have some help. And then also the other thing that's happening tonight that you're going to catch on camera is I'm going to turn the camera around. We are doing some cool video. Hold on. Technology. All right. So here we are. There are some people. They're staging bats over here right now. Oh, got to refocus my camera here. And then, oh, I see. Hold on a second, friends. I forgot something. See, technology. Alex, I can't rotate the camera when I'm live. Did you know that? You could do it last year. Nope, I couldn't. I forgot. Sorry. Need to refocus the camera. Okay, so if you look over here, Alex Wiles and Nick Savageau have this huge camera crane, and they're going to try to get some footage from up high of the animals getting released. So it's going to be really cool if I can make my technology work. All right, awesome. Okay, I guess we're staying in vertical mode tonight, guys, because I forgot something about the technology, or I'd have to disconnect and come back on again. Okay, so they are bringing bats down right now, and we're going to get up close. Lauren, first question.
How many species of bats are there in Nebraska?
Oh, okay, so officially, they're still staging. I'm gonna turn this back around to me and to Lauren. There are officially 13 species of bat found in Nebraska. One's pretty incidental. It's the Mexican free-tailed bat. We've had a few cases confirmed of that bat in the state, but they're normally a southern species. And then in rehab, it's pretty common for us to see about 7 to 8 of those species. Some are becoming far less common due to white nose syndrome. So there's some species that we don't see that often anymore. Other questions?
We don't have a lot more time.
Are we all down there? I saw some questions earlier. I'm glad you're here for your first bat release. Okay, so that was a question that somebody asked earlier. Will the bats go back to their usual place? The answer to that is yes. For everything that we know, bats will return home to wherever they came from. That's one of the reasons why we partnered with the Jocelyn Art Museum 12 years ago, is because a lot of those bats come from eastern Omaha. And when we release out there, we give them the shortest route back to their home. A lot of people get concerned that if we release bats near their home, they will set up a new colony in their home. And that is actually not generally the case. So they are going to go back to their home colonies. All right.
How long is a brown bat's wingspan?
About a foot. Somebody's going to correct me, but they're about a foot. Okay. All right. We're going to do something here, people.
I have a question.
Yes.
If you get a bat out of somebody's home and then it goes back to their home, that's not a good thing.
Right. So that is a good question. So if you are somebody who has bats in your home and they have a colony in your house, there are humane ways to exclude bats from your home. We of course want wildlife to live in the wild and not in our homes. And so we can give you advice on that. If you don't want to do a humane bat exclusion yourself, we can refer you to a company that does so humanely. So always feel free to reach out to us or to go to our website, to the bats page on our website, and a lot of that information is contained there. The thing about these bats, the bats that you'll find in your home, which around here are most likely to be big brown bats, is that they're crevice-dwelling bats. And when they don't have natural habitat like caves or rock crevices to get into, they do just fine in the walls of homes and commercial buildings. So that's why they come into contact with people so often. Okay, I think we're ready for this. If I can turn myself around. All right, so you guys are going to, are we faced this way? Okay. I'm going to turn this around, friends. Maybe. Button. Sorry, guys. I am just like technologically sad. Okay. So this is Erin Stuckey. So go ahead and open up maybe this one actually. Yep. I'm going to get some close-up pictures of the bats really quick, and then I'm going to step back and let the bats get released. But so that you can see, hopefully we'll... So these are males, females. I can't. I can tell the difference. Yes, friends, I can tell the difference between a male and a female, but I just don't know which cage is full of which right now.
Laura, can you talk about how old some of these bats are that we're releasing?
Yeah, I can. So some of these bats are definitely what we would call first-year bats. They were born last year, but a fair number of these bats are older. So big brown bats can live up to 30 years or more. They're a very long-lived species. And go ahead and open this one too. There's just a really wide spectrum. When we house them in the winter, we house them males and females separately because, in my opinion, the males can't behave themselves, but also because that's a lot of times when they roost in the wild, they'll roost separately. So these are the cages that we put in our bat hibernaculum where we hibernate our bats. And they've been a little deconstructed for release, so they don't actually look exactly like the way that they do. But they generally have this multi-layered fabric on the side. And so you can tell these are crevice-dwelling bats, and they like to hide. So these guys are they're hiding in these little crevices, right? So they might have to have a little encouragement to fly out because they feel pretty secure in their little crevices right in here. All right, so I'm going to get out of your way, and releasers, you guys go ahead and you can encourage them, and we're going to watch and we're going to answer questions while you do that.
Can you talk about some of the natural predators of bats?
Sure, I can. Just like with all wildlife, their number one predator is humans. Humans are most to blame for the destruction of habitat and the destruction of roost sites that kill bats. But there are a lot of animals out there that will also kill bats. So owls, crows, other corvids, if they're on the ground or if they're reachable, things like raccoons will kill them, foxes, coyotes, everything like that.
How can I get bats to hang out in my bat house and not my actual house?
Aha, okay, that's a great question. One of the things that you can do to attract bats to your bat house is to make sure that there's appropriate habitat and a water source nearby. Bats are more likely to be in an area where they're within a quarter mile of water. Now, water doesn't have to be a lake, doesn't have to be a stream. It can be a pool, it can be a bird bath that's reliably filled. So bats just need some type of water source. If you build a bat house, it does need to be designed and mounted in a way that's appropriate for where you live. So if you live in a really hot area, you'll want a lighter colored bat house. If you live in a colder area, you'll want a darker colored bat house. And that's so that it's warm enough for them and not too hot. So in a southern area, if you have a black bat house, the bat house will get too hot for them. Woo! Did you guys see that bat come right up to my phone? And so like if you lived in Arizona, you'd want a white bat house. If you live in Nebraska, you want a dark brown or dark blue bat house. If you live in Minnesota, you might want a black bat house. Bat houses need to be mounted at least 8 foot in the air on a predator-proof pole. Remember I said that that raccoons would kill bats? If they can climb the pole and put their hand in there, they will eat the bats that are roosting. And bats are smart enough to avoid that. So they won't roost anywhere where it's not a predator-proof pole. Okay? So that's what you want to do. Did I answer that thoroughly enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then someone else asked, what can we do to attract or benefit bats near where we live?
Great question. So once again, all of the bats in Nebraska are insectivorous, okay? And most of the bats in the United States are. If you want to attract bats and if you want to support nature, you need to do things that support their food source and make sure that they have water and shelter, right? Like all wildlife. Leave the leaves on the ground where insects breed, right? Go for a more natural type of landscaping. Stop using pesticides and fertilizers that can damage wildlife, because those things equal more insects out there, more food for the bats, and more bats in general. And quite frankly, the bats really need it right now.
My mother would like to know, is it true a bat cannot take off from the ground?
Oh, that's a great question. So bats can take off from the ground, but they have a harder time doing it. And so you don't ever want to just leave a bat on the ground if you find it. It's also likely that a bat that's just sitting on the ground is injured or ill in some way. So it could be in trouble. So the answer is, if they have enough space and they're healthy enough, they can pop themselves off the ground and get some flight. But if they're in an enclosed space, they won't have enough room and they'll hit a wall or something. So it's difficult, but not impossible.
Okay, and Pam would like to know, where do these bats hibernate and for how long?
Great question. So here in Nebraska, our bats go into hibernation usually in late October, and they come out of hibernation generally in April, sometimes slightly earlier. So basically what they're waiting for is not only good temperatures, but also an insect population that can support their foraging habits. So they come out when the insects come out. And as we all know, living here in Nebraska, the weather is very unpredictable. I think I got in that bat's way. I'm going to show you the bats again, because you know what, guys? They're pretty cute. She's thinking about going. He's thinking about going. What cage am I in again? Sorry, everybody. Other questions?
Yeah, can you talk about what bats do for Nebraska's ecosystem? Yes,
so, wow, you guys have good questions tonight. You have the brain better. Or did you ask that question, Lauren? No. Oh, good question, whoever asked that. So, of course, there are lots of benefits to bats, right? So people like them because they eat insects like mosquitoes that we don't like. So that's a human benefit, right? They protect us from the diseases that mosquitoes can carry. They also kill insects that lay eggs on our crops. And so they protect people from a large amount of economic damage if they stay free from pesticide poisoning and other issues like that. In terms of the ecosystem, bats, depending on which species it is, they can pollinate plants, which is important for the ecosystem. They can disperse seeds if they're fruit-eating bats. What else, Lauren?
On general, how much do these bats weigh?
These bats are big brown bats, so when they're healthy, they weigh between 1/2 ounce and 2/3 ounce, or between about 15 grams and 20 grams. At hibernation, they sometimes weigh quite a bit more. They may put on enough fat to weigh 20-some grams, 20 to 24 grams in the winter. The young males can weigh 12 or 13 grams. They can be a lot smaller. It just depends, but male big brown bats are smaller than the females.
Okay, Melody would like to know, do all bats carry rabies?
Oh, Melody, all bats? No. So actually rabies is quite uncommon in bats. It's less than 0.5% of all bats carry rabies is generally the statistic that we hear about. But it is possible for bats to carry rabies. So what we all need to do is remember with bats the same things that we remember about all other wildlife. And that is, do not ever handle wildlife unless you are trained to do so. If you must handle wildlife, you need to wear gloves and avoid being bit. With bats, we have some extra added protections because of rabies. And that is, if you ever find a bat in your home and the bat was in a room where someone was sleeping under the influence of drugs or alcohol, or very young or very old, that bat should be tested for rabies, because a bat bite is so small that you might not know you were bit if you were in an altered mental state. So that's why we have those recommendations that are specific to bats and not all other wildlife.
So Stacy would like to know, can bats still fly if they have a torn membrane in their wing?
That is a great question. The answer to that is it depends. So some smaller tears or punctures they can fly just fine with. But if they are a larger hole, or if the tear is in like the leading edge of the wing so that it splits the wing, those bats generally cannot fly. Really large wing tears can heal over time, but sometimes they take over a year to heal. We do keep those bats, and then we test fly them to make sure. Oh, I don't know if you guys just saw that, but the bat left and then it came back again. I don't know what that was about. He was just like, okay, I'm going back. They feed me mealworms there. All right, other questions?
In Nebraska, can you keep a bat as a pet?
I just saw Mike. Was that Mike? Like,
Yep.
that was very funny. He said asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend.
No, you cannot. Bats wouldn't make good pets. They are pretty charming. I do have to say, hold on, let me fix my camera here. That these bats that we care for here in Nebraska are actually very, very clean. My brother's really funny. Actually, hi, Ed. They're actually very clean. They groom almost as much as a cat does. Sometimes we actually can have over-grooming issues with bats. They also are the big brown bats are a social animal. They roost in colonies. So they are really, really fascinating and kind and charming little animals, but they do not make good pets.
So Nancy would like to know, are they going to get more active as it gets darker?
Yes. So interestingly enough, one of the reasons that we choose this time and that this species of bat works so well for bat release is that these bats emerge naturally from their roosts at dusk. And that's why we always try to do bat release around dusk, because we're mimicking their natural habits. I'm going to kind of walk over here. I'm going to get in the way. You can watch Alex release a bat. Alex's bat is thinking about it. So yes, they will be active. This species of bat, the big brown bat, I'm going to do a scan just to see if we can see any flying. I don't know. I just saw one. Whoa. I don't know if you can see it on the camera on Facebook Live. See, I lost my train of thought. What was I saying? Sorry, Facebook friends.
We were talking about, you were talking about them grooming themselves.
No, that was like 5 minutes ago. Sorry, guys. If somebody wants to remind me what I was talking about, you let me know. I don't remember. So the question was, do they stay active all night? Or do they get more active as it gets darker? These guys do, as long as it stays warm. They are known to forage for quite several hours. And then what they'll do is they'll hang outside of their roost somewhere in places that we call night roosts. And in those night roosts, they'll digest and they'll poop out a bunch, and then they'll go out and forage some more before they go back to their roost. Usually in the pretty early morning. These guys don't stay out all night. This species doesn't. Different species have different foraging habits. But if you are somebody who periodically walks out and sees that there's like what looks like mouse poop on your table underneath your umbrella, it's probably because on your outdoor table with an umbrella, the bats are getting up under there at night and they're roosting to digest at their night roost. And then they are leaving. They're leaving you a nice little present.
Someone wants to know, can bats fly from birth, or do they have to be taught how to fly and hunt?
So flying is instinctive. So they will start flying even if they're not raised with their parents. but they cannot fly from birth. So these guys are really underdeveloped. They come in hairless with their eyes closed. And over the course of several weeks, depending on the species, they get large enough to eat solid food. And so they nurse off of their mothers in the wild, or here we nurse them. And then they eat solid food, or they begin following their mother out to forage at night. So in the wild, we do know that they forage with the adults of their colony if they're colonial, or forage in the area of their mother if they're a solitary tree-dwelling bat. At Nebraska Wildlife Rehab, we give them flight time in places where there are insects, and then we monitor their weight to see if they're gaining weight. If they're big brown bats, sometimes we'll put them in an enclosure with adult bats, and then they can mimic those bats in terms of foraging. That's how we teach them how to eat. This is just really cool. So these bats are all squished up against the screen here because they're hiding behind that back flap. So you can see all these bats just hanging out. We're getting ready to get released. Back up a little bit. Next question.
Someone would like to know what kind of species generally come to the rehab center other than the big brown bats.
So the most common bat that we get after big browns are eastern red bats. We also get hoary bats. Both of those bat species are tree-dwelling solitary bats that migrate for the most part. And so those bats will be returning to Nebraska here shortly in the next month or so. Hoary bats will leave Nebraska by August generally. The eastern red bats may migrate out, or they may partially hibernate until about November, and then we don't see them anymore. After that, we get silver-haired bats. We get evening bats. Those are still pretty common. We used to get more northern long-eared myotis, which are rapidly declining in population because of white nose syndrome. The bats finally tore their blanket down. We used to get tricolored bats a little more commonly, but we don't. I saw that Melissa asked, when do you release the other species of bat that you have? They will get released probably tomorrow. The silver-haired bat and the evening bat. There is only one of each of them now, and so we will drive them back to the address where they were found and release them back into the wild. So they're ready to go. They just don't want to fly around with 400 big brown bats. So I'm just going to go over here because I think it's very fascinating how they're filming here.
Aaron would like to know how many bats generally live in a colony.
Oh, that is going to vary widely, not only by species, but by area, and also by gender a bit. So I've seen big brown bat colonies that are as few as 10 bats, and I've seen big brown bat colonies in our area that are more than 1,000 bats. A lot of times you think about the Mexican free-tailed bats that you see at Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, Texas. Those bats can roost in the hundreds of thousands or potentially even millions. So that's a different type of colony than we have here in Nebraska.
Are there some good places in Nebraska to observe bats?
Your own backyard, actually. If you come out at dusk and you sit in a chair and you look up to the sky, you probably will see bats. Sometimes people confuse them with birds as it's getting darker. But you do have to be a little bit careful because birds like nighthawks can fly. They look like bats when they're flying a little bit at night. So that's one place. But if you go anywhere where there's a lot of native habitat, few pesticides, and a lot of insects, you're going to see bats at night. Just look up instead of out.
Eric Gardner says, "Hi Laura, how long do baby bats usually stay with their mothers?"
Oh, depends on the species. Hi Eric. It depends. So, how long do they stay with their mothers? If they're a bat like the big brown bat, they actually will stay in the colony well into the next year. How closely knit are they to their mothers after they're foraging well on their own? It might be a few months. But they tend to stay in the same colony, at least for that first winter when they're hibernating. And then beyond that, after that, in the second year, the males might split off from the females, but the female young may stay in the same colony.
So Bob wants to know, why don't they just take off on their own when we open the cage?
So that's a great question. And this is a really important, actually, this leads to a whole nother question about wildlife in general. And that is because they are not in their home territory, right? So this is a perfectly suitable habitat for them. They're going to be fine and they're going to be able to go home. Let's see if we can see the bats in the sky. Can you guys see them? They'll do just fine here, but it's not immediately recognizable to them. And because it's not immediately recognizable, they aren't going to be as confident in leaving. So for example, if I got a new bat, and I took it right back to the address that it came from, and I opened my car window, it would fly right out of my car, right? If I let it. That is true of all other wildlife as well. So wildlife is territorial, almost every species. So for example, if I were to take a raccoon and trap it, and I were to go dump it in a completely unknown place, even though it doesn't want to be in a cage, it may not leave the cage because it's scared and it doesn't know where it's at. But if I were to take that same raccoon back to its home territory, it would bolt out of that kennel like a shot. And that's true of all wildlife. And it's a really important point is that we should never trap and relocate wildlife because, number one, they don't know where they are. And then they won't be able to know where the predators are or the food sources are or the other dangers besides predators like cars. It is shown that most wildlife that is translocated, like raccoons, possums, woodchucks, will be dead within 30 days, either from a lack of resources or from trying to travel back to their home territory, being killed in that travel process. And particularly at this time of year, if you trap and relocate wildlife, you could be relocating a mother, leaving her babies behind to starve. So we don't ever trap and relocate wildlife. We always make sure it goes home again. And that's exactly, so these bats are hesitating a little bit, but they're going to be just fine.
Mandy wants to know, are their wings thick or do they tear easily?
They are not thick, and they do and do not tear easily. So let's see if we can get somebody to show us a bat wing. Can you show us a bat wing, Erin? Okay. See if we have enough light here for you guys to see it. Let's turn this way for me because I've got better light over here. Okay. So she pulls out that bat wing, and you guys can see that you can see through it, right? You can see my fingers through it. But it's skin, so it doesn't tear super easy. But if you put something sharp in there, like a cat claw or a pen or something like that, it will tear. So it's both. Ready? Yep, that bat was ready to go.
So
what else?
You always hear blind as a bat. Can you talk a little bit about these bats' actual vision?
Yes. So big brown bats see about as well as we do. So they see quite well. I don't think that there is any bat species that has really impaired vision. Can you think of one? No. I can't think of one. And that's an important time to bring up that bats make up 1/4 of all species of mammal on Earth. There are over 1,400 species of bat in the world. And so they make up a significant part of our natural ecosystem around the world.
So Roxanne, who is 7 years old, would like to know, why do we keep the bats in the smaller cages, or how are they different?
I see. So there are a couple of reasons. Some of the bats in the smaller cages we've been hand feeding them for a while. Frankie, don't leave him on the ground, please. I know she wants a picture, but that's it. Okay. So, sorry guys. Some of these bats in these smaller cages have been hand fed. Recently they didn't weigh enough, so they've been just separated. They weren't in the hibernating chambers. And then also we had so many bats in one of these hibernating chambers, which is fine when they're asleep, that we had to separate out some of them because it was too many to carry in this one big container. So they're in those smaller containers for various reasons. If you guys ever come out to the Joslyn Art Museum and watch bat release there, you'll know that we transport them in those smaller containers as well.
So are all bats in a colony equal, or is there a hierarchy?
You're asking me a question I actually don't really know the answer to. Maybe there's a bat biologist out there watching, one of our friends that can tell me that. I will tell you that bats will squabble over roosting spots in my experience. So they do squabble over what the best roosting spot is. But I don't know if there's a certain hierarchy where one bat wins over the other due to hierarchy, or if it's just whoever's the most persistent in getting that spot.
So if bats eat mosquitoes and live bugs in the wild, what do we feed them in rehab?
Great question. Here at Nebraska Wildlife Rehab, we feed them mealworms that have a specific, the mealworms are fed and treated with vitamins in a certain way to ensure that the bats are getting all of the nutrients that they need. Mealworms are not a regular source of food, or any sort of terrestrial bug is not a normal source of food for this species of bat. There are some bats that do glean bugs from branches and things. And so we actually have to teach them how to eat them. Otherwise they won't. So that makes bats super time consuming, because we have to hand feed each one until they learn how to eat on their own. I do have to make a shameless plug. I don't think, do we have a donate button up on our Facebook page?
No, we had to do it before. I learned afterwards.
Okay, I messed up, friends. Normally we put a donate button on our Facebook Lives, and I messed up by not doing that prior. So I do just need to make a plug that, you know, it does take resources to raise bats and all other sorts of animals here in Nebraska. And we're entering into baby season now, when your donation means more than ever to us for all of the formula and special enrichment that we need to help all of these baby animals survive in the wild. So if you are able to donate, we would truly appreciate it if you would click on the donate button on our Facebook page, or go to our website and click on the donate now button and donate to help us rescue wildlife in Nebraska. It is truly appreciated, and it's needed now more than ever. So thank you so much for doing that.
Our friend Chris from Game and Parks would like to know, are there any endangered or threatened bat species in Nebraska?
Yes, so the one that we are most concerned about that is listed as federally threatened right now is the northern long-eared bat. That status is due to them being susceptible to white nose syndrome, and they're dying off in huge numbers. So every year we used to get a few dozen northern long-eared bats, and now if we get them, they are in the process of dying. So it's a really dangerous situation for bats right now. And there are lots of great researchers working on white nose syndrome and how to protect our native bat species. But it is still something that is dangerous for those species. And hopefully we'll be able to keep the northern long-eared bat in Nebraska. But it is a pretty dire situation right now. See the bats? What other questions?
We have some questions about why do we get all these bats? Like, what are some reasons that they come into rehab?
The vast majority of these bats come in the winter because they're found inside of a building, in somebody's home, in a commercial property, in apartments, probably because they have a colony within the walls of the building somewhere. And people find them. Sometimes they're perfectly healthy. Sometimes they are super dehydrated and need some assistance. Sometimes they're thin. But what we do is we take them, we rehydrate them, we evaluate them for injury and illness, we feed them, and then we put them into artificial hibernation for the winter. Now, on the flip side, if it's spring or summer, the most common reason we would get an adult bat is either because somebody's cat caught it and has injured it, somebody's outdoor cat generally, or because sometimes the tree-dwelling bats get downed in storms when the winds are really high. So that happens as well. And then we also get orphaned baby bats. So that's more common in the middle of the summer.
So Mary had a great question. Mary wants to know, why are we putting some of the bats back in the cages?
Okay, so you saw some of the bats getting put back down into cages. That's because they didn't fly off. So if a bat lands on the ground, we give it a boost and we give it another chance to fly off. But then if they miss again and they don't fly off, we go ahead and put them back in a cage. And then we do one of two things. For some of these bats, it's a little overwhelming to have people around. So we wait an hour, and then there'll probably be about a dozen bats that will just go later on at night when they're ready to go. And some of them just weren't ready to go for whatever reason, even though they're checking out physically okay. So we'll take those bats back inside and feed them and give them a chance to go at a later date.
And we had a couple people ask, what is white nose syndrome that you mentioned?
Okay, white nose syndrome. You guys ask all the good questions. White nose syndrome is a fungus that grows. Sorry, I get tired of talking, man. I should make Lauren talk now. White nose syndrome is a fungus that grows in caves and can also grow on bats. It was imported from Europe, probably on the gear of cavers or the shoes of people that go into caves in Europe and then come to North America. And that bat was doing fine until I got it in its way. And then it has spread across the United States now. What happens is when bats come into contact with white nose syndrome when they're awake and not hibernating, it doesn't seem to affect them. They groom it off and it's fine. But what happens is during hibernation in caves, the fungus will start growing on the bats and it wakes them up either because they're itchy, or it's bothering them in some way, and it wakes them up and they start grooming and flying out. And when bats are in hibernation, they're particularly vulnerable because if they fly around and burn a lot of body fat, there's no insects out for them to replace that body fat, and they'll die of starvation before spring. And so white nose syndrome is waking up bats and causing them to die before spring. Here in wildlife rehab, we have not luckily had a city bat with white nose syndrome. It tends to be in caves and rural areas. There are a few ways that we can help a bat overcome white nose syndrome, and one of them is by keeping them awake and letting their body fight it off themselves. But unfortunately, that's not an option that's available to the millions and millions of bats in caves across the United States right now. It's okay. That bat had a little bit of hair loss. And that, I think I mentioned over grooming earlier. Sometimes they'll over groom or sometimes they'll groom each other a little bit. And then they have a little bit of a hair patch missing. It's all right.
So someone said, bats aren't rodents and they're the only flying mammals. So do you know what mammal they are closest related to?
Oh, I need a geneticist to answer this question because, quite frankly, I've heard lots of different answers over the years about which animals bats are most closely related to. And one of the things that people like to say is bats are more closely related to primates than they are to rodents, but that doesn't mean that they're super closely related to primates either. They're in their own scientific order called hand-wing Chiroptera. And the important thing to note is that bats are not rodents. And the most important part of that is that we all know that rodents can reproduce very, very quickly. Not all, but most, especially the smaller ones, like the different mouse species. And their young hit sexual maturity pretty early and can start breeding as well. Most bats only have one baby a year. There are a few species that have more, but tend to only bring one baby, if that, through to maturity. And so that means that if we were to go and wipe out an entire bat colony, that we could, it could take a very, very long time for the bats to replace those numbers in the environment. So that's why it's critically important as bat advocates that we speak out against habitat destruction, that we speak out against any sort of activity that might disturb bats in their roosting areas, because if they die, they won't be able to replace their numbers in the wild very quickly.
So earlier you said that we put bats into artificial hibernation. How do we do that?
That's a great question. I think last year I might have actually posted a picture of our hibernaculum on Facebook the day before bat release. What we have done is we have taken a wine cellar, a professional wine cellar, which looks like a refrigerator, but it's fancy, and it controls temperature and humidity. And that wine cellar, then we put these larger cages into this wine cellar, and we keep the bats at a very specific temperature and a very specific humidity all winter long. And what that does is it optimizes their weight retention and keeps them asleep and hydrated for the winter. And that way we have a very specific formula for how much a bat needs to weigh, whether it's male or female and what size it is, when it goes to hibernation, so that it can make it all the way till spring without having to wake up and eat again. And so It's very scientific. What else?
We had someone ask, what is the smallest species of bat in Nebraska?
Oh, in Nebraska. Oh, tricky question. I know the in the world question.
Well, give us that too, because I didn't.
The bumblebee bat is the smallest species of bat in the world. In Nebraska, are there any bat biologists that can tell me? Jeremy White. We should make Jeremy White watch. The tricolor bat, the northern Midas is slightly bigger. Tricolor bat. But there are also some western Nebraska species of bats that I don't handle very often that might be smaller. But kind of in contrast, a tricolor bat adult might weigh 7 grams, as opposed to a big brown bat weighing 15 to 20 grams. So they are quite tiny. Little brown bats, I'm not remembering their weight ranges right offhand. Sorry guys, I'm kind of drifting here with my camera. Losing it. Whew. Okay.
Zach would like to know, is white nose communicable between bats?
Yes. So it's a fungus, so the spores spread, right? And they can spread it from bat to bat through grooming or contact. It's also in the cave ecosystem itself. Mike, you're funny. And yes, I agree. I think that older bats are better. So bats do get better with age, just like wine.
Kathy would like to know, do bats give live birth? And if so, how many babies?
Excellent. Yes, bats are mammals. So they give live birth and they nurse their young. So big brown bats typically give birth to 1 baby a year. Sometimes they have twins, especially if they have a lot of support. Sometimes if we have a bat that's awake, a female bat that's awake all winter long, she'll have twins in the spring. Before we get a chance to release her, we try to avoid that. If she goes into hibernation, she won't, but if we keep her awake, sometimes she will. And that's because bats mate in the winter, and then implantation of the embryo is suspended until spring when they wake up from hibernation, for this species of bat specifically.
Did you mention how long their gestation period is?
It depends on the species of bat, and once again, they mate in the fall. Big brown bats mate in the fall, and then the embryo doesn't implant until spring, and then once it does, big browns are what, 30 days? Who's out there? Leslie, Renee, Jeremy, Scott, Jennifer? Somebody save me on this one. I don't think I know specifically. Ask me about a red fox, and I'll tell you exactly what their gestation is. But for big brown bats, I don't pay as much attention.
And then who is bigger, the males or the females?
Female bats of these small insectivorous species are bigger than the males. Ooh. Oh, went that way. It's like messed up my shot. Okay. Other questions? Oh, I do see a question about how long bats can incubate rabies. Yeah, so the answer, you're right, Allie. There are no proven incubation period times for rabies in any wildlife species, actually. But bats, because of the fact that they can go into torpor and they hibernate, we do know of some cases of bats incubating rabies for more than a year. But I don't know that we have an exact number, but we do know that it can be more than a year. So we can't quarantine a bat and know after 10 days that it has rabies or doesn't have rabies like you could a dog or cat.
Ruxin would like to know, can bats live in a treehouse?
Well, sure. If that treehouse has walls and crevices that they can get into, they certainly could. And if it's suitable for them, so meaning that there aren't any predators that can get to them and it's warm enough for them. Bats can also live in trees depending on the species. Out here.
We did have someone ask, how big is our bat cellar?
Our wine cellar is about the size of a refrigerator. If I remember, I'll put a picture of it on Facebook tonight or tomorrow so that you guys can see it. That's about how big it is. And actually, we have this one big, beautiful wine cellar, and we need another one because we get so many bats. So, unfortunately, they're not an inexpensive item. They cost about $4,500. So sometime, hopefully in the next year, we will get another wine cellar so that by next winter, we'll have enough space for all of our hibernating bats. How we doing, guys? Are we getting close? You might want to like. Oh, these are holdbacks. Are we getting pretty close to our last few containers? Okay.
We need to try again.
Okay.
A little bit.
Okay. We're getting close, guys. Did you know that you've seen almost 400 bats get released tonight?
We've had a couple people ask, I know we talked about it earlier, but where's the best place to put your bat box?
Okay, so the best place to put a bat house is at least 8 foot in the air on a predator-proof pole. And if you live in Nebraska, you want your bat house to get about 8 hours of sunlight a day. That is so that the house stays warm enough that the bats stay awake and are alert in the evenings when they need to go out and forage. You should also paint your black house a darker color that's not black. So like dark blue, chocolate brown, something like that. People in Nebraska do have success with putting bat houses on the sides of houses if they'd like. You do have to make sure that it's far enough from the roof of the house or any sorts of gables that an animal like a raccoon couldn't hang over the roof and get into the bat house. I also would say that you want to be a little cautious about putting a bat house on the side of your house. Because if you have an open vent or gable somewhere, if the colony in your bat house gets too big, they might decide to move into your house. Woo. There goes that one. I like it when they go above the tree line because then you guys can see them on camera. Woo, there goes another one. What else?
We did have someone ask, do different species of bats hibernate in the same places? It's like, do they hibernate together?
Yeah, some species of bats are actually known if it's a cave ecosystem. Generally not when we see colonies in houses. It's usually just one species. But in cave systems, even here in eastern Nebraska, there are many species that are known to be in the same cave system. Maybe not hanging in the same bunch of bats, but in the same cave system. So bats like big brown bats, little brown bats, evening bats, northern long-eared myotis. I feel like I'm missing one now. Those are the ones that might be found together here in eastern Nebraska. So Gwen, do bat houses need to be within a mile of water? We actually say they should be within a quarter of a mile of water source, but that water source can be something simple like a reliably filled bird bath or something like that. Swimming pool. Okay, so somebody asked a question about bats transmitting COVID virus to humans. So let's start very specifically with the bats that are in front of us. These are big brown bats. Big brown bats were one North American bat species because they're so common. They were specifically challenged in the lab, in multiple labs in the United States in the last year. And they attempted to give these bats COVID multiple times, and they cannot contract it. They cannot carry it. So in the United States, that's the species that's been tested the most. I am sure that there are biologists looking at whether other bats can get COVID, but the short of this is that North American bats, although they can, so it's important to know that coronaviruses as a family of viruses are common, okay? Some of them cause the common cold. Their dogs can get a certain type of coronavirus. And the bats in North America can carry this family of viruses, but it's a different type of coronavirus than what COVID is. And so those of us who work with bats are not surprised that these guys cannot carry COVID, and it's likely to be true of all North American bat species. Okay, so dealing specifically with North America, we have seen that mink can get COVID and die from it. Most of the time it's seen in mink farms where the animals are jam-packed into cages together and it's easy to transmit a virus. It's not that it hasn't been found in wild mink, but it's much less common because they don't have a way of coming in contact with a human with COVID to get it, or other mink, right? So in fact, I believe that the mink in the wild that have tested positive for COVID got it by approaching mink in a mink farm. So there is that issue. But in general with wildlife, and we also worry about cats. So for us, bobcats, we're very careful with, and we use specific measures to make sure that we don't make the animal sick. We are not concerned about getting COVID from any of our animals, but we are concerned that if we are caring for a mink or caring for a bobcat in rehabilitation, that, you know, one of our staff or volunteers could be asymptomatic and transmit COVID to our wildlife. And so that's why not only do you guys see everybody wearing masks tonight because we're in close contact with each other, we wear masks in our general working day right now as well to protect the animals in our care. But as of right now, the only North American animals are the mustelids. Specifically, we're seeing it in mink. And then the felids. So you've all heard stories of tigers and lions in zoos getting COVID from a keeper, right? And so then the data is out on old world bat species. I have seen a lot of, you know, of course, we've all seen science that says that they believe that bats were the original host of the COVID virus in Asia. But if you read some of the newer science, you'll see that that might not be true. So that was a very long answer, but in the end, it's important to note that you should not handle wildlife unless you're trained and know the risks of handling wildlife, because there are zoonotic diseases that can transmit from wildlife to people. In fact, our dogs and cats can carry them too, but when you're a responsible pet owner, you take your dog or cat to the vet and they get dewormed for parasites and they get their vaccines to protect them against these viruses. So it's not much of a concern in our domestic animals. I want you all to know that a mosquito just landed on my wrist.
I'm getting bit like 5 times.
I want these bats to eat these mosquitoes.
Stay around. So Melissa would like to know, what is the most rare or unique bat that we have ever rehabbed?
Is this Melissa Martinson?
This is.
Hi. That's a very good question. We have gotten, in the last 20 years, we've gotten 2 Mexican free-tailed bats. And so whether they accidentally migrated a couple states to the north on accident, or whether they maybe came in, like they got trapped in a shipping container or a truck and accidentally hitched a ride up here, we don't know. But we have seen 2 Mexican free-tailed bats here in the last 20 years. What else? You guys see these bats flying
Patrick
around?
would like to know, very good point, about how much money does it take for the bats to be housed and rehabilitated each year?
That's an excellent question. So one bat will cost about, depending on what's going on with it, $10 to $15 to rehabilitate. And we generally get about 600 of those. So you're looking at about $6,000 a year to care for all of the bats in our care. And I have to say very specifically that doesn't include all of the staff hours, the paid staff hours that go into that. So that's, if you want to sponsor a bat or a bat a month or a bat a week, you can also set up a recurring donation to support them. And then there are things that cost extra. So for example, if we would like to buy another bat hibernaculum to make sure that all of our bats can be housed next winter, we'll need to spend another $4,500 to get a new bat hibernaculum so that we have 2.
So Ruxin, who has had a lot of questions about bats tonight.
Is Ruxin 7?
He is 7.
Awesome.
Yeah. He would like to know, are bats afraid of loud noises?
Oh, well, bats definitely have an excellent sense of hearing, given that these bats navigate their world through echolocation, which requires them to hear the sounds that they emit when they bounce off of surfaces. And so, yeah, they have an excellent sense of hearing. It kind of depends on the noise and if they perceive it as a threat. They can get used to certain noises. So, for example, if they're roosting in the walls of a house, they get used to things like televisions and other noises that might come about. But if that animal sounds like a predator, they can be disturbed by it for sure.
Mike wants to know, do we ever get tempted to name the bats we work with? Like, do you ever bond with them?
The answer is, of course. Of course we do. It happens with all of our wildlife. But one of the things that we try to do as professional wildlife rehabilitators is we try not to get too attached to these guys, because you saw those cute little faces, right? Like, big brown bats look like chihuahuas. And so we try really hard not to get too attached to them, because if you get attached to them, then when you release them, you're sad. And you don't want to be sad. Like, look how cool those guys are. They're so happy to be back out in the wild, and we want to celebrate on release day. And so for those of us who love bats, they also have great personalities. They're very interesting, and they have individual personalities amongst groups. So yes, sometimes they get names, but oftentimes they get names like Sassy, because that's the sassy one in the group, or, you know, or Sweetie, because they're the nice one in the group when you go to hand feed them or something like that. And a lot of times with our other animals, we'll name them for where they came from, or what type of situation they got themselves into to be injured. So it might be the fish hook goose, or the pop ring opossum that got stuck in pop rings or something. So that's kind of how we tend to name our animals. What else? You guys want to hear this one?
Tara wants to know, do you have any favorite species of bats to rehabilitate?
Oh, all of them? Bats are amazing and fascinating and beautiful. I recommend that you guys scroll through our Facebook page and look at the different bats that we've rehabbed, or go to our website. Eastern red bats and hoary bats are really fluffy and furry. And they have this beautiful fur that helps them camouflage. And so they're really fascinating, but they all have different personalities. So hoary bats are the largest bat we have here in Nebraska, and they know it. So a lot of times if they don't want to be messed with, they'll try to bully us. They'll spread their wings really far out and then hop around to try to scare us away. I think little brown bats are just the calmest, nicest little bats to deal with. But they all definitely have awesome personalities and unique personalities themselves.
So everyone sees the sweet crane we have. Where is this footage going to be available?
Oh, we'll do something with it. Alex and Nick, do you feel like you're getting good footage?
Yeah, we're getting some pretty good stuff.
Cool. All right, we're going to do something with it and we'll let you know. Carrie Hansen is asking really specifically about Patricia, who was a bat that they named that I think you probably were the rescuer. The bat came from Grand Island. And I will tell you that I drove her to Grand Island last night and released her. So she has been released. Last night, we released several animals from central Nebraska and on the way back. So we released our sandhill crane that if you follow us on Facebook, that juvenile sandhill crane got released yesterday. We had a pigeon from Kearney that got released in Kearney yesterday. A cardinal from Milford, and bats from Grand Island and Seward. And so all of those bats were taken back to where they came from and released back into the wild yesterday.
Do these bats ever get imprinted on humans?
That is a great question, because that is a danger with some wildlife. So no, these bats don't imprint on humans. They can get habituated to the point where they feel comfortable with us and they'll come up for food and those sorts of things. But we try to avoid that, which means we handle them as little as possible, and we try to get them self-feeding as quickly as possible, so that they don't associate people with food or positive experiences. Because although we're all nice and we really love the bats, it doesn't guarantee that out in the wild all people will be nice. So for all wildlife, we try to be really careful about that. Are we done?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! All right, everybody, you can see all these empty containers laying around here. All these bats got released tonight. Ooh, by all these awesome people. Thank you, everybody. Woo! Jen! And these cages are empty. These two big cages are empty. They had well over 100 bats each in those cages. So, yes, there are bats in Alaska, Aaron. There is a species of hoary bat, or a subspecies of hoary bat up in Alaska as well. The hoary bat is the only bat that's found in all 50 states in the United States. Nancy Yackel, Carlos the peacock is doing fine. Great question. We do have a peacock here, even though it's not native wildlife, but some really concerned neighbors noticed that he wasn't doing well in a neighborhood here in Omaha. And he's suffering from frostbite on his feet. So we are soaking his feet daily and treating his frostbite. So he is an old peacock. But he's doing just fine, and he's beautiful, and we love him. Do you guys have any other questions for us tonight? Well, thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. And then shameless plugs. If you can help us rehabilitate bats and all the other bat species, or all the other animal species that we take care of every year, please do click on the donate button and donate to Nebraska Wildlife Rehab today. And then, if you don't already follow us on social media, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We do have Twitter too, but Facebook and Instagram are better for our purposes. And then also, go to our website, nebraskawildliferehab.org, and sign up for our email list. I am not kidding when I say we have some really big announcements coming up and some really cool collaborations, and we want to share those with you. So please follow us so that we can do that. Hi, Heike. Hi, Diane. Hi, friends. I didn't see everybody that I know that's out there tonight, but thank you guys all for joining us. We love sharing this with you, and hopefully next year we are going to be able to do it back at the Jocelyn Art Museum. So that is my hope. If they'll have us, Amy, I don't know if you're out there tonight, Amy Rummel, but hopefully we can collaborate again next year when we've got COVID taken care of, and we can all be together again. Plus, if anybody has seen my really cute bat patch right here, I just want you to know we sell these in our online store, and they come from a really cool artist in the UK. So if you want one, I've got a few left. You can get online and buy them. Woo! A bat just flew right in front of me. Yeah. All right, everybody. Hi, Stephanie. Melissa. Will you still Facebook Live when you're back at the Jocelyn? I don't know. Should we still Facebook Live? For those of you who are out of town, like Melissa? Maybe we'll try to do that again. We will see. All right. Any other questions? Good night, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And see you again next year.